before the session, we were talking a little bit about what the inspiration was behind this idea and why you were compelled to present about compelling video projects. So I just wanted to ask Rags or Will, do you have any reasonings behind why you wanted to organize this session?
Thanks for having us. Thanks for being here. So the motivation was kind of, we've been to a number of video summits now, and I think there's always a conversation after those about continuing a dialogue. And one of the things we noticed after those summits, at least for us, since we work in HR, a lot of our stories are human focused. And we kept getting a question and a dialogue amongst the community about like, how do y'all kind of get some of these projects? How do you create them? And we noticed it was a topic of conversation for a lot of teams. And from my perspective, I worked with Will a long time, and I think Will has a really great flow of how he sets up a meeting with the client and walking through a request process, and then kind of nudging the client at times to make a more compelling video. We live and breathe the visuals and cinema and that motion picture imaging and storytelling. And we thought it would be useful to kind of have an informal conversation and kind of create a dialogue amongst all of us in the video community to start talking through how do we get clients to buy in, whether that's a request that comes from an external team or from our own team that we want to shift and move and attach to a business outcome that may be organizationally important. And so our motivation is to start a conversation, share our process and some of Will's work, which I think is great. And that's where it came from.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we're really lucky to have you both. Maybe for folks that haven't met you at the Video Summit and maybe new folks joining on the on GVC, if you want to introduce yourself and say what you do and what team you're on, and then kick off the session.
Sure.
That sounds good. Okay.
Will
I'll
Moran.
get out of your way.
Okay. Thank you. Will Moran. You all know me. I'm a producer on the People Dev team, which is part of People Operations.
And I am Rags Williamson. I am a cinematographer and help production for our team, also in People Operations under People Dev. We kind of make, in a general sense, educational videos for Google and People Ops. So with that, we'll kind of jump in with today's session. We wrote this, creating opportunities for compelling video projects. I think an informal thing might be client buy-in. That might be the more informal version of it. And our goal today is going to try and walk through how do we shift clients from accepting and desiring your video project, whether that's something that your own team generates a creative idea on, or that's a client requesting something from you. And some things we just want to lay out ahead of time, some assumptions that Will and I are going to be making, which is we are assuming that you can generate compelling ideas. We are video professionals. We know storytelling. We know it's interesting. We're assuming that you have a bank of ideas that you want to tell or stories that you want to make. We also are assuming that as professionals that you can execute on those ideas. If you have a version, a reimagined live action SpongeBob SquarePants that you think fits at Google, we're imagining that you know how to execute on that idea. And then we will be having a space to kind of talk through, how we can just create space for those ideas. But just our thing here is just going to be outlining our process of shifting clients and starting a dialogue for how to get client buy-in on some of those ideas. And so that's who we are. I think we've gone through this again. We've covered it. If you're on, just rewind if you're watching later. And I'll let Will take this over as a kind of a loose approach for what we think.
Yeah, so I think it's rare, if not non-existent, that a project or a request would come to us in a state where you immediately go, oh, this is going to be so much fun to work on. This is really going to use all our skills. This is going to make our team shine. This is going to be a great opportunity. I don't think any video project really comes to us in that state, but rather a project comes and then you can see, well, what is the potential for this project? Where is it? And where do we want to get it? And I think of it in terms of a matrix. And you can see the matrix here. And there's, how important is this to the organization in general? And then how visually compelling or how amenable is it to, filmmaking? And a lot of things that come to us I think we're starting with number 2, right?
Yeah. Well, so
most of the content that comes to us comes in that number 1 category, right? It's really high in organizational importance, but it's not really something that lends itself to filmmaking. It's coming to you because there's programs and program managers and budgets and things saying like, we need to make material for this because it's important to the org. And as part of that, we should probably have some video. The second most common that we actually see, and you might see this too, is surprisingly stuff that's neither important to the organization nor really visually compelling. And why does so much of that? I mean, that's just like a corporate environment. We tend to just make content, right? And that's that number 2 category, is that content production engine that's not really concerned with really how important even is this to the greater scheme of things, and certainly isn't saying is this a good use of video.
In our world, that comes as like train the trainers, right? So that's when someone's about to give a talk and they want to teach other people how to facilitate that. They'll ask for us to record the person giving the talk so that other facilitators can learn from that, or just a presentation recording.
Yeah, it's a great example. I already kind of went over this. It's really important to the org, but there's not a lot of visuals. Compliance material, legal stuff. Things that change very frequently. Talking points, OKRs. I forget what test and beta is, or programs that aren't really
either unreleased, or maybe like recording something. Let's say UI of a phone, and the build is not finalized yet. Right. It's important for some engineers to maybe see that, but it's not necessarily compelling to go, this is why we decided on these variables instead of this variables, or like, should this button be blue or green, or whatever that is. Visually, it's not as compelling.
And then we've got that third quadrant, which is low importance to the org, but actually really high in terms of visuals. We're doing an all hands meeting. We've got a new VP coming in. We really want to excite the audience. We want to get them engaged. We hear you guys are a lot of fun to work with and can do really interesting stuff. Can you give us something? And you can immediately think of all these different ideas and scripts, and there's a lot of flexibility. People want to laugh. They want to be engaged. You can leverage all of that intellectual property that's out there in terms of movie references and soundtracks and popular culture. And it's a lot of fun to do. The problem is, if you spend a lot of time working on those things, you may find, when budget and headcount allocations come up, at the beginning of the year, that nobody's really mentioning all those fun videos. They're really looking at that first quadrant of like stuff that you did that was really important to the org. And so you have to be careful in that third quadrant.
And this is where we want to get.
Yes, I think Rag summed it up well when he said bingo on the slide. And this is stuff that is high importance to the organization. It's a key, OKR. It's a new product release. I can go on. I think we all know what is important to our organizations, and it really lends itself to filmmaking. And this is where I say, I don't know if there's any project that lands in your inbox in that quadrant, right? I think typically it's going to wind up in one of those other 3 quadrants. And so really the essence of this talk is one, recognizing that, because I think a lot of people think they need to just kind of deal with material that's in the quadrant that it's in, or they try to just make it a little bit better and don't strategically think, how can I take this and really shift it so that it remains important to the organization, but I can really use all the tools as a filmmaker that I have to execute on it.
Yeah, and then just a general note, this is a informal thing. We don't have like strict metrics on this process. So don't take that away. This is just kind of a loose guide for like how we kind of think of this. And then it's about shifting from that upper left to the upper right quadrant, or from the bottom right to the upper left. And kind of that's the shift that we talk about. And so
this is science. This is real science.
To Will, it is science. To me, it's a conversational point. So we're going to give 2 examples of kind of where we think this shift kind of happens. And we're going to use 2 examples. So This first one, so this is the client request. The client request was on mental health awareness. And the goal here, build awareness for our mental health programs. This, on the quadrant here, this was important to the business, but not necessarily visually compelling. For example, like short-term leave is one of the largest leaves of Google in terms of most time employees take. Therefore, the benefits team was, we can have real effect if we can build awareness for some of the mental health resources we have. They kind of came to us with the first idea. We decided to deliver on it. And that's our benefits lead, who is amazing. She is super smart. She has a PhD in this stuff. However, she's not discussing her like lived experience. I don't know if we can play a little bit of this video, just the opening. Do I need to do it? There we go. So this was kind of the client kind of urged, like, this is what we think, and here's what they had. And so we made this for them. I'll just show a little bit of the opening before we kind of move.
I'm not tough enough to be able to handle this. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm alone. Stories that Googlers tell us from their darkest places is about despair. It's about feeling alone or isolated.
So I'm going to stop it there just because you can kind of get the sense of it. We tried to do something a little bit visual for them. But I would also say, like, I don't know, it kind of feels like a corporate video of the person who talks about benefits talking about the benefits. So I wouldn't say it's awful, but I also think it could have more impact. That's our total runtime, 343. After taking a pass at it and doing this and kind of having that land on a site, we kind of reimagined the idea closer to the story we would want to tell. And so this was our shift. Same goal, build awareness for mental health. But this time we're going to have the Googlers talk about their experience with mental health. And our total runtime here, 10 minutes.
I can't pinpoint a time when it started. All my memories involve being colored by this feeling that I'm not good enough, that I'm a failure in some way, that everyone else in the world is better off than me because they're better people than me.
I can feel it constantly. I was and am constantly anxious.
I felt super lonely, but I couldn't, for some reason, get out of that low point. When I would go home with closed doors, I would cry a lot. I grew.
So I hope that you want to hear more. The idea there is that's a much more compelling case. It is a longer video. We had longer watch time, more views. This video surfaced up to our VP, which then shared to the entire company. I think it was even mentioned as a resource during mental health awareness. That the first video did not do that. It was just our benefits lead, as smart and wonderful as she is, talking about the talking points. Instead of saying, there's real Googlers here working on real stuff, sharing compelling stories. And the way we kind of did this in a loose, and we'll get into this later, but we made their version, and then we kind of went back, talked to these folks about sharing their mental health stories. And later on, we actually have a VP talking about it too. So we have a VP in the video discussing their mental health challenges. And then we just made it again on our kind of own. And this had much more impact and reach as a result of this. And not much is different. It's still a head, close up, on black background, talking through stuff. But it's a more compelling piece. We can think of this externally as well. One of the things we think of is, like, if you want to think of a lot of what's happening online in terms of education, it comes rooted from an academic setting at a university. Someone standing up here almost like I am, giving their talk. If you're thinking through a coding example, right, and trying to show someone how to code, someone who's doing that may think of an example like this.
You can see here how I do that, right? I use the function name, and then an open parentheses, and then I pass all the arguments to that function. In this case, this function requires 3 arguments. So I have 3 numbers, 1, 2, and 3, and I separate each argument by a comma. So I have 1, 2, 3 here, and then a close parentheses. Okay, so the function name, and then inside parentheses, all the arguments separated by commas that you're going to pass, right?
One more time, do we want to hear that 3 more times?
And you know, the interesting thing about this approach is to make it more interesting, what they did is they didn't just use the code, or they didn't just use the image of the person speaking. They combined both of them, thinking that would be more interesting. But I think unintentionally what you do when you do this is you can neither read the code, nor can you really get a sense of this person who's speaking, right? You've kind of like diluted it so that it's really serving neither purpose. And anyway, I think we can compare that with the next one.
Yeah. And this would be the next one.
All right, so take me through a demo hack that you've prepared for us. I really want to see this and how this actually works. So there's a vulnerable piece of software on this computer.
There's a vulnerable piece of software over on this computer, right?
Right.
So you see the only thing plugged into that computer is the power cord. The only thing that's special about that computer is it's connected to my wireless network, but that could effectively be just connected to the internet as well.
Okay.
So you just need a computer that's connected to the internet running a piece of vulnerable software. Now over here, I can use this program called IDA to analyze the software, right? So this piece of software is not open source. It's actually a problem from these computer security competitions I play called CTFs. So this is a example CTF problem. Now I've already analyzed this, so I can tell you the vulnerability is in the change note function. In the change note function, there's a read, which reads in.
So I'll stop it there just for time, but I hope you're a little bit interested in kind of what's going to happen. And I think there's a few differences here. One, they're showing people when they're talking about code. There's also, and Viceland does this super well. There's an expectation on your audience to understand the platform. If I need to see what that code is, I'm going to pause on the code. I don't need to hear the variable names 3 or 4 times. A savvy user, don't underestimate your audience. A savvy user will rewind on YouTube, they'll pause it, they'll go at 2 times speed, they will get through the content they need, they don't. The previous professor was coming from a different thing. If I was to hear that live, I may need to repeat that 3 times so that my students understand. If I'm on a video platform, I can kind of go right through that and leverage both things, both the engaging, this is shot like an interview, even though we're dealing with kind of, hacking software. I can then trust that my user will go download the piece of software and play around with it if that's kind of what a part of this is.
And this is what you're going to have to teach your clients, right? The resistance to shifting from that first video to the second video is going to be a number of things. Is one, they're worried that that those key variable names aren't going to come across, that the name of the software, that people are going to get lost, that they're not going to follow along, that they won't be able to learn from this narrative style. And so the first thing you might have to do is just teach them, it's not like it used to be, in a non-condescending way. You might have to show them, let's take a look at some, gaming videos where they're teaching you and just see how fast people talk, right? And there's just this built-in assumption that you can pause and rewind. And so a lot of times you do have to educate the client, I think is a big part. And it's the same too, you mentioned runtime before, going from a runtime of 3 minutes to 10 minutes. That's not an easy sell. There's just this idea out there that people won't watch long videos. So the video needs to be short. And one of the first things I do is I say, like, let's have a conversation about this. Why does a video need to be short? And they say, well, people will lose interest, right? They have short attention spans. There's this whole kind of and it's just completely made up, because what I explain to them is it's not that they have short attention spans. We actually have highly tuned attention spans, and we can detect a bullshit and a waste of our time like that, and we have very little tolerance for it because we don't have to tolerate it anymore. There's so many different options, and so that it's not that people won't watch a 10-minute video. They won't watch a 10-minute video that's not good, right? And if your content's not good, then it literally can't be short enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this past Saturday, my wife and I binged through all of Little Big Lies. So we sat down and watched 6 hours of content straight, right? So and I would think that each of us probably have examples of that. If it's compelling, you will listen. And there's ways to make even things like this more compelling instead of just that.
I feel like the audience is very different between the two coding videos, though. The first one being specifically for programmers, and the second one being kind of more of a GA. Is that sort of?
You're supposed to use that microphone. Start over.
I can repeat.
Sorry, I was asking, the audience seems very different between the first video and the second video. Like the first video felt more like I'm a coder, I'm watching this to learn how to do specific things, whereas the second one was sort of educating someone over like a product in general, not really getting into specifics. Is there a happy medium that or does that video, the hacking one, get into like more specifics, or?
Well, I guess I would say I would use something like this as a reference. So if I was building a creative brief for the client, right? Say they say, you know, we have this critical piece of software that we need to train 200 Googlers on, right? It's internal only. It's core to their work. They don't understand it well enough. We want you to make a video that will teach them. Well, the easy thing to do is say, well, we'll just do that first style, right? And then what's going to happen is you're going to find that virtually nobody, you know, when you look at the metrics, like very few people watch it. And even those people who do watch it, the audience retention is really low. They're not finishing it. And so you're not accomplishing your goals. And so what I would recommend is taking this more narrative style and saying, well, let's talk about this software. Like, why is it there? What is it used for? Hopefully it's for like, you know, sometimes you get lucky, right? It's security software. It's for detecting hacks into Google. It's like, okay, well, let's talk about some stories of where Google was hacked. Let's get some stories of where this software was able to stop that, and we can weave that in. Now, we still may need to be more content heavy than this, you know, Viceland piece, but I still think this Viceland piece, I mean, he's getting really detailed. And as you watch this video, I mean, he's actually typing code. He's talking about buffer overflows. He's talking about what those buffer overflows do using, you know, different pieces of software on different devices. I mean, when I see this, I think that's technical enough that you could probably teach just about anything.
I think the second point here is think about what this guy's doing, which is like giving the why as he's explaining it. Whereas in the first video, it was 20 seconds just of variable 1, 2, 3 with commas and parentheses. Just remember, and then he referenced it, and then he like reset it again. What if you could reimagine of like, reason we need to have these variables in this way is because, you know, whatever reason, and then come up with a very, you know, Thanos wins, right? You could build some example hypothetically even to make it more interesting as to what these numbers mean, why they are this way, and what they're doing. So it is a little bit of a medium, but I would get to what's the purpose of the thing, and then even in the coding, instead of repeating it 2 to 3 times, you could come up with situations or scenarios that are more visual, that are more compelling, that are more emotional. Maybe the numbers 1, 2, 3 are a family, and it's the mom and the dad and the kid, right? Or whatever, right? You could start to weave things in that make it more interesting than just saying the numbers in some example.
And the other thing is, we're jumping ahead. We're going to get into this more later, but you know, sometimes you say no to projects, and a lot of times an approach like this can help you make your decision, because if they come back and they say, no, the most important thing that people must learn from this video is that there's variable 1, there's variable 2, there's variable 3, and they need these kinds of curly braces around them, then you start thinking, this isn't a video, right? This is documentation. This is a website, right? This is some kind of user guide. And so it kind of helps you, like if they're really like, no, that we don't want to do any storytelling, we just want code on screen, then you're like, oh, well, that makes it easy. You probably don't need a video.
And then some of this is just improvisational here, but like, what if the curly brackets were super important? Because if you didn't include the curly brackets, like some disaster happens, right? You could then build a little scenario of like, these curly brackets are really important. Why? Google went down for 5 seconds because of blank, right? And then you could reinforce the idea that the curly brackets in the coding is important. And start to get people to buy into that. And that may require a little bit more like journalistic searching on our end to get to that moment. But you could build still a 30-second spot that teaches about the curly bracket, but also has some like reasoning behind that change and why you shouldn't, you know, use the square bracket or whatever. Also not technical at all. So
that was actually pretty good.
That example, I don't know anything about square brackets, curly brackets. So with that, we hope to focus a lot more on Q&A, so we'll get to that at the end. The next thing we're going to walk through is just our general process, how we scope a request, what we do, and the steps along the way. And then we'll talk through specifics of each of that, and then go into examples and then Q&A. So for us, this is our request process. At a high level, we have the request that may come from us, Will or I or John or Phil may go, hey, I have this idea for this thing. And we're like, okay, that's great. We'll then kind of bring it to or it may be a client sending us an email, or kind of like, here's the next ticket, or some team reaching out and going, hey, we want to teach on this thing or show this thing. We will then take that request, whether internal or external. We will bring it together to the team, for our video team to review it. We'll then reach back out to the client, and then we will have a full-on creative proposal, or a proposal of some sort to them.
So this is mainly for a request that is coming in from, for us, it would be somebody from People Ops, somebody from People Dev, might be somebody from the staffing org. And the first thing I do when I get a request is I do research on the person who's requesting it, because sometimes it's coming from a really senior person, or somebody who has been at Google a long time who's really experienced. Sometimes it's coming from an intern. And it's good to have that context, because that way, when you start asking questions and you start proposing things, you kind of know, well, what kind of power and understanding does this person have to even help me with this? Let's see, what else was I going to say on that? Yeah, there was an interesting one that we just got that I just thought was worth mentioning. Is it was somebody, I forget exactly what he was asking for, but he needed some support, and and he was a contractor working for a vendor. But when I started talking to him, I realized he was an ER doctor, and part of what he was working on some stuff that Google was doing with medical devices, and he had some certain ideas about how video and filmmaking could help that. And he just had this whole different perspective. And even though he was outside of Google, just the fact, he was actually a really high-level consultant. And so I understood by doing some research on him that I probably could propose actually, more advanced things, or recommend a budget, or, suggest he adjust his timeline. And he probably was empowered to make some of those decisions.
Yeah, I think working with Will for the last time, this has been the step that's been most influential in my work. If we think about internal requests, the same thing happens. I have a really cool idea for this great visual thing, and involves, a SpaceX rocket or something. The first thing I need to do is start to research, what teams does that affect? What products does that hit? Does that touch any of their OKRs? What OKRs are out there? What is the company doing that may be important? So even though this is a fun thing as a cinematographer to film, how can I start to get an understanding of what's important to the business? If you want to think about organizational importance, you can start to research those broad things of the teams, of the products, and the people you're working with.
And then we have the first meeting with the client, and it's really important. Google is a high pressure kind of place, and oftentimes when you meet with somebody, there's an immediate assumption you're meeting with me because you're going to start working on this, and this is kind of an operational meeting to talk about how we're going to move forward. And so the first thing I try to explain to them is, one, let's keep this really informal. Two, we haven't committed or made a decision. That really what I'm here to do is try to understand your request better, and make sure that both video and our team is a fit for working with you. I look for red flags. Maybe we can go over a little more of that, in the Q&A. One big red flag for me is a lot of times I will ask for budget, even if I'm not sure we're going to need it, because if they say they don't have budget, I'll even ask for a very, very small amount of budget, like $1,000 or $500, because if somebody basically says this isn't worth me going to any manager anywhere at Google to even ask for $500, that's a no for me. It's I don't want to work on it either, right? If it's that low priority for you, it's that low priority.
Yeah, it's less than a flight, right? If someone you're working with is not willing to have any question to their manager, right? And what's $500 to most any of our teams?
So anyway, that is one of the things we do. Other red flags are, large body of content to be produced in a very short period of time. And so I also start to try to kind of pull that apart. Are you open to, what's the top priority content? And are you open to maybe producing the top priority content first on that tight timeline, and then, shifting stuff later? And then I also try to understand what's driving this request and why is it coming in now? And a lot of times it is driven by OKRs. And that's good to know. It doesn't necessarily influence my decision to yes or no, but sometimes the pressure that you're getting to complete a project by a certain deadline is not because there's a product launching or, you know, there's some kind of mandate, but you're like, oh, that's convenient. That's like the day before, you know, okay, you know, a perf comes in, and really this person probably put in their OKRs that they would complete this video. And one of the things I like to do there is like, well, what if we had produced the video but hadn't actually edited it yet, right? Or finished the rough cut? Like, you still made the video, and so it can give you some kind of leeway. And so these are a lot of things I go through in the first meeting of really trying to just figure out what's driving this request and what are the things that are flexible about it. And then laying the groundwork for success in terms of seeing if there's flexibility in time and quantity of videos, and seeing what kind of budget's available.
And with that in mind, these are kind of the questions we look at for that first meeting. For me, I think that first one is super important. We don't go in and ask about the video. We go in and ask about the program or the product, because the person's going to sit down and go, so I have this video. And I think what we do is go, hold on just a second. What is the thing the video is about?
Mm-hmm.
What is the program? And then we kind of get that groundwork and kind of go from there.
Especially in our department, a lot of times there's a people ops program that's a really big program, and then people dev will have part of that really big program, and then there'll be multiple people dev teams that are responsible for executing on it. And we will be talking to one of these sub people dev teams that is making a specific piece of content, of which the video is a sub piece of that. And it can be really hard to find out, like, well, what is this for when you roll it all the way up to the top? So a lot of times just trying to get that 10,000 foot view is really important to understanding the project.
And then, yeah, kind of a few others here. I think one of the big ones we get to is who are the decision makers? And one of our examples we'll get to later. We have a request and we think these two people are kind of the decision makers on it. But what ends up happening for us is that we find out that our SVP is actually, we're making this for an audience of one. And so if we can land that, then the rest will kind of roll together. But it takes some question making to realize, like, once we make this and give it to you, are you then going to like ask several other VPs or several other directors, or is it going to have to go to another team for review? Who does make the decisions on the video?
So then after I've met with the client, or Rags has met with the client, then we'll get into into a room just with ourselves, and we'll talk about, like, what is this project? Where does it fall in the matrix? Can we shift it, and do we want to shift it? Is this somebody that we want to work with? And then other times, we'll think, well, we can do this work, but maybe we shouldn't shift it. Maybe based on who it is and what they're looking for, the easiest thing to do is all they're asking for is to come in the studio for a day and film a talking head. Sometimes we'll just do that. We'll be like, let's just bang this one out. Like, not every video you make has to be the most creative, compelling, piece of work you've done. You have to kind of save room for other things. And so these are the things we'll talk about as a team, and see who, like, what's the potential of this project, who's available to work on it, who's interested to work on it. And then from there, we'll make a decision. Yeah, and sometimes a one is a one.
And I think in this realm, so obviously in an ideal state, you could just say yes or no on all sorts of projects, and they're all amazing. That is not the reality we live in. We all know that. So for us, what it is about allocating the necessary resources to make the thing that it is. You don't need to, sometimes we want to make it better. Maybe it's better for this thing to be shot on a 4K, 6K Dragon, whatever, right? Well, maybe this project doesn't necessitate that. Maybe it's okay to film this on a different format or things like that. And then you can save your time and energy on those more impactful projects that you want to or feel compelled to work on. And we'll kind of do that in our team review. We'll start to think through, is this something interesting? And I think the other thing that happens in the team review is we start to see, is there places that we would be interested in? So, like, let's say we were presented with the presentation style coding thing for the person talking about the really important variables 1, 2, 3, right? Is someone in our team maybe like, actually, I would love to kind of tell that story of, 1 and 2 and 3 being something and build on that, or like, why are the curly brackets important, right? So someone may have an idea that's like, we have to make the video, but I have an idea on how we can make that video a little bit more compelling by injecting something that our team creatively wants to grow or build or develop. And we'll have some examples of that later. Anything else on this slide?
Nope.
So sometimes a 1 is a 1. We allocate resources accordingly and don't overinvest in projects that are lower that we may still have to make. And we go to our next step, which is kind of following back up with the client.
And I communicate very clearly with clients. If it's a yes, then there's some other things that are going to happen. But let's start with no and maybe. It's really hard to say no at Google. Actually, I think there's a culture of not saying no, right? There's a culture of saying like, let's circle back to this in a little bit of time. There's also a culture of not accepting no as an answer. We hire people because of their ability to push through and get what they want. And so a lot of times when you're talking with people and you're trying to tell them no, you're finding that they're really not interested in taking no as an answer. And so I often have to rehearse in my head saying very clearly, we will not be doing this project at this time, because it's hard for me to do that, especially if it's somebody who I've had a positive experience with, right? Like someone who seems just very genuine, like they'd be great to work with, but it's just not a great project to take on. It can be hard to say no. And I really avoid saying maybe, because I think it drags out, it can drag out a lot of different projects. You'll find you have a lot of emails and you kind of feel, it's also really stressful. You just feel this general sense of like anxiety and stress, because you kind of have all these like half yeses, half nos that are just kind of in the pipe. And you've probably all felt that. And so getting clarity and saying no very clearly is important. And then if it's a yes, this is where I have an initial conversation about the budget and do you, we have some ambitious ideas on this. We'd like to kind of elevate this content. I'd like to give you a creative proposal, but it's only worth doing that if, we can come up with this, initial kind of soft budget and a soft timeline that we think we can execute in. And then assuming they go, yes, I can get the budget. And a lot of times you feel like, well, they're not saying this, but it's like, I can get the budget if you can give me something that I can go to my leadership with, that really warrants the budget, right? And that's on me. And it's just like, well, as long as you tell me you're willing and that technically the budget is available in your organization, then I'd like to give you a creative proposal, for your video project that kind of maybe elevates it. And then this is more for me. I set a deadline to create that proposal, because actually, doing a creative brief or a creative proposal can be really hard, right? It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of mental energy. And I find myself sometimes, even though I'm the one that sold the person on this, then really procrastinating on delivering this creative proposal to them.
And with that, we get to the creative proposal.
Yeah, so the creative proposal itself is a product. If you do a really great creative pitch, I've been surprised at how well they've received, even when they haven't resulted in videos. That you're perceived as a really professional, creative, almost in-house ad agency immediately. It's just like, oh wow, you gave us this great product. We can pass it around to members of our team. We can show it to senior leaders. We can take it into meetings, and that alone, people can really feel like you've given them something, even if you haven't actually created a video. People don't read. I used to do AV scripts because I thought, like, I'm going to give you something really, really detailed, right? So that there's no questions about what we're delivering. Nobody would read them. And if they did, I could tell they couldn't make that mental leap of seeing what it would look like, as a video. They have a hard time with the abstract. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. And you really have to make people like see it. A lot of times, we were laughing the other day, I always would I've always resented that or try to avoid that idea of like when startups pitch, they're like, oh, this is Uber for, laundromat service, or like, I've always hated that. And I couldn't remember the one where I was specifically not doing it and nobody could get my idea. And then finally I just said like, oh yeah, this is X for Y. And everybody's like, oh. And I was like, oh, I guess sometimes you have to do that, right? You just have to reference things that they understand so that it clicks, even if even if it's not completely accurate. It's almost like leaders and others like want you to do that. They want you to kind of encapsulate it in really easy to understand kind of thing. So,
and I think one thing here is like, think of the proposal as a product. Imagine if someone had to pitch your idea without you. Start to think of it in that framework, and it'll start to be like, okay, here are the 3 or 4 things that I want them to know, so that when they tell my story or my idea to someone else and I'm not there, they can do that effectively.
I've also been surprised at how literally people will take made up stuff that is in my creative briefs. So often what I'll do is I'll like show a picture of a noodler, you know, and then in quotes, it'll say, you know, I was really scared when I got here, but, you know, my leader did this and it made me feel so good, right? I've never met this person. I don't know who that is. I've had people like be really uncertain about a creative brief. And when I start to drill down, they'll be like, you know, that noodler that said that thing, like really, they don't do that like over here. And I'm like, or like, they don't do noodler. I'm like, well, that was made up. It's like not real. And they're like, oh, okay. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's also like, oh, wow, if I put an image and a piece of text and a quote, like it resonates with people. They feel like, oh, this is what this is going to look like. This is what it's going to feel like. And that they're really reacting strongly to it is actually a good thing, right? It's not a bad thing. But I was actually shocked at how strongly people will react to things that, to me, feel totally made up and just arbitrary decisions. I think that's it. Oh, and they also react really strongly to reference videos in music. I think I was working with David back in the Studio G days when I had an entire video proposal approved based on just playing a piece of music. And she just started crying and was like, I love that music. Let's do this. We did it. They wouldn't pay for the music, and then they wound up not using the video. And I think it was at last year's Olympics. There was a campaign about like moms and Olympic athletes. They were just showing like these athletes training, and they played that music, and it was to that video, and my wife was crying, and I was crying too for a totally different reason. I was like, because I had the same idea like 10 years ago with that same piece of music for a Google product instead of like an Olympic Dove soap commercial. Anyway, it worked. I was like, look, it worked.
But then there's a caveat, right? Which is like, if you use a reference and then you can't get rights to that reference, you just need to be aware of that. Yeah. So like, there is a little bit of back and forth on that. The one thing I'll add from like what I'll call an internal request is we do this same process if it's an internal thing. It may not be to the client or product team. It may be to my own boss justifying why we should do this. Or it may be to the client to say, I know you have this example where you want to tell the story of the variables 1, 2, and 3. I want to get at the person designing it and why they're doing it that way. You should still take in mind the creative proposal. It doesn't have to be just to clients. It may be from a perspective of, I want to nudge what you think of as a lecture style into a more cinematic world. Take these things in mind as well. From like, even if it's a request from your own team, and start to do the research on OKRs and impact and what's important to the organization, even if that you're a part of, to build the case into your proposal for the next step. And a few things on our proposal. These are just some like things that we keep in mind when we're doing it, which we may have talked about slightly.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot. I think number 2, you may not be in the room. Don't assume when you put together this proposal that, and actually, you know, the more ambitious proposals that you do, a lot of times the person you give it to is then going to need to take to a more senior leader, and they may be the ones proposing it in the room while you're not there. And so designing it with that in mind, that it's a very high level, easy to go through kind of, you know, slide deck that they can just click through. And doesn't require a lot of secondary explanation. Like this deck would not be really helpful to somebody if you were to just give it to them, right? There's a lot of explanation that we're putting into this, so I try not to make the decks like that. Have a simple backup. You know, if it's your only idea and you don't have a plan B, sometimes, you know, at the creative proposal stage, you've already kind of said you're going to do the project, and if the backup was the script that they originally came to you with, which I think a lot of you have probably had that experience where you get these like horrible scripts. They're like, hey, can you make this video? And you're like, no, but I'll do this for you. you want to make sure that the backup isn't to go back to that thing, that you have this kind of middle ground, right? Where you're a little disappointed, but maybe you have kind of an idea of like doing something simple. We'll bring you in the studio. We're still going to use some interesting music, some better graphics, get some talent on screen, things like that. Highly visual, 5 to 10 slides, and then laying out a very clear timeline and budget in the proposal is something I like to do, because it can just really start to reinforce expectations before they try to say yes to something.
And then, this is the one slide I didn't touch up, so I apologize for all the text in that little small font there before. But just have the elevator pitch. So once you go through the creative proposal and you put all this effort or time into it, have the informal conversational 1 to 2 minute thing. That is kind of a loose classification, kind of if you want to think of it on the matrix, and it's the informal version of the shift you want to make, and tie that to the specific kind of business case that you're making for it. We should do it this way because we're trying to get more people to watch it, or we want to do it this way because we need to connect to a human story or emotion. For us in HR, that's often what we're doing. We're trying to reach out and tell people, hey, you're not alone in this, other things have happened, or these benefits are aware. It's more about getting the information out there and getting people to see it than it is necessarily about like the specific details of a tool or something like that. And so just have that informal version of the creative proposal that you can do in 1 to 2 minutes. We were kind of talking yesterday, like Y Combinator, watch some of those stuff. Like they have great 2-minute pitches and they get people to give them lots of money. So that's a way to start to look at like how can you kind of shift into what's the problem, what's the solution, and what's the result going to be of our solution of like, why is it better to tell in the Viceland or the presentation style, why is it better to tell that story that way than to do the more formal lecture thing? Or like, why is it better to have the Googlers tell their mental health stories than to have some person from benefits give that story? And with that, we're just going to kind of, the next few bits are going to be our case studies and examples if we've done successes and failures. And then we'll kind of get into Q&A and kind of go. And so if you have more specifics on some stuff we've worked on, we'll dive into some of those details.
Am I still on camera? These chairs are.
You're still on camera. I don't know where the camera is now, okay. But it's over there. Yeah, okay. We're still there.
Okay, good.
So I think this is.
Oh, am I supposed to be talking about this?
Well, it's your project.
Yeah, I think when this project first came to us, so Eileen Naughton, who's our VP of People Operations, was going to send a welcome email to all people, not just new Google employees, but all people who joined the People Operations department. And so then as part of that, they wanted to have a video that would that would be embedded inside the email. And the initial request, it was really just, I think they wanted to have Eileen just kind of talk on camera, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, because if she was already writing the email, like, why are we putting this video in there? And anyway, should we just show the video?
Yeah, I don't know if we have to show all the video, but
okay.
In general, it went from a low organizational importance to low visual importance, and we shifted that kind of to high. There's two things to keep in mind here, which I think Will, after walking through the process of a lot of things, found out that it was an audience of one. Eileen, our SVP, was the person who was going to send this in an email, sign off on it, and do it. And so he did a lot of research into Eileen. What is her perspective on People Ops? How should it look? What should it be? What are some of the things she's saying about it that kind of went above what the request team was offering? Also, it's our SVP. We're not going to turn that down, right? Like, we're gonna say we're gonna make this video, even if it's a talking head. So, is there a way that we can do this in a way that's more compelling?
And also, once we knew that she was, that this was really representing her, I was aware, from some things that she said, and having Lorraine, who's the head of marketing, at some of our People Ops events, that she really. Branding was important to her. Google's branding was important to her. She really had a lot of respect for the brand marketing teams. And I think that she kind of wanted some of that for People Ops as well. That kind of maybe a little more polished video production, but still worried about keeping it genuine and authentic. So
we're gonna play a slight clip here. Do I click on this or?
Yeah, I guess we didn't embed it.
It's not embedded.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, we can just see what happens. Click it.
I've clicked it. It's so it's playing on the laptop, but not on the thing.
Here, let me try something. If you do command tab, oh, there you go.
Well, it's that, but it's not up there.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All good.
Your G-card video.
Oh yeah, those were fun.
Yes.
Got referenced this week. That's awesome.
Which one? The part 1 or part 2?
The one I wrote.
The second one?
First one.
Okay. Well, you were part of both of them.
Yeah, we can play
Also
from
the first
I'll take
Really?
Yeah, I'll go from here.
Second one, yeah, it was a different name.
Okay. All right. I think we are.
Yeah. So this is Eileen, and we brought her in and we shot her on green screen, and she's talking to our org.
We've built here. I'm energized by the possibility for people operations to build and grow the world's most innovative workforce. And I'm grateful to have the privilege of doing the work we do alongside each of you every day. In people operations, we're committed to making sure that every candidate has a great experience, whether they get an offer from Google or not. We're committed to ensuring that every Googler has the support they need to perform at their best, that every manager has the tools they need to be a great manager and empower their teams. And that every leader has a people strategy that helps their organization achieve its goals. We're also committed to ensuring that Google has a thriving, inclusive culture that supports the world's most innovative workforce and the magical products we build.
So that's kind of how we reimagined it, right? It is talking points. There's a few things that are key and kind of behind the scenes there. Will dug into Eileen's talking points. What are the 4 major things that Eileen says all the time? Those 4 moments. We then go, what would be interesting to us? Well, we're going to film Eileen in green screen. What else would be cool? I don't know. It might be cool to shoot some Legos. So we decided to do that. Now our creative team is engaged. We want to make the thing, even though it's still technically a talking head. And then we reimagined Google for the 4 talking points as a Lego scene. So we have Googlers getting recruited, core to HR. We have Googlers having a good experience in the office on their teams and the MKs. That's scene 2 at the MK. We then have managers in their office working on stuff, and then a VP or someone presenting on stage. We reimagined each of those things as key points. So now the creative team is engaged. As a cinematographer, I'm like, yeah, let's shoot some Legos. Let me learn how to light with like some little LEDs and stuff like that. We brought in a Lego designer to like build out Charlie's stage and things like that. And then we grafted, based on research, knowing that Eileen is the person who's going to do this, we grafted her core message for all of us into the video. It was a question we were going to take on. In previous iterations, it would have just been Eileen on that kind of blue, steel gray background. You know, how much are people going to watch that? I don't know. We'll see. And then we made this video.
Yeah, and I'd love to say that I knew this going into it, but I think it was after we made it and saw the response is where we realized that we had hit on something that people ops had really wanted. And the problem with people ops is, you know, they have very specific, often legal business needs, or you know, they describe things in very specific, you know, business and legal terms, but they want to present the organization as a fun, warm, here for you kind of place. And, you know, and often those two things collide. It's like, how do you use all this business and legal language, but still come across as a warm, fun loving place to be? And it turns out you show Legos while you're doing the business language, you know, specifically with Google branded, you know, t-shirts. So.
Yeah. And what ended up happening here is it went up to Eileen. Eileen loved it. Our SVP loved it. All of our organizations started to love it. And then it defined the brand of People Ops. So as a result of this, this is high quality, it's professional. It's not just Legos in like a claymation world, or like bad claymation world, I guess I should say. It is now kind of a polished, shot on nice macro lenses. We still put all that effort in. And we know that based on research that Eileen still wants to be googly, and the word in the past was scrappy, but she didn't want that same kind of like, let me just hop up on a GVC and present all this stuff. She wanted something a little bit more polished, having come from the sales world and the business world and using Brand Studio for a lot of things. So that's kind of our first case study example. I think I need to switch back over to the other one.
Building Charlie's is genius. It really sells everything.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to actually find a Lego master who lives in Oakland.
Super cool dude.
And he builds these like elaborate kinds of things. He actually mocks them up in software first, so you can previs them, and so that was really critical.
Yeah, it was awesome. And do I have to use the clicker? Okay, there we go. So our second example. So that one was an external. That was an external request. So our SVP and our Noogler team said, hey, we need to present, we need to onboard new people. This is one that's internal. So if we want to think of the shift from that one, this one is low organizational importance to high organizational importance. I started with a compelling idea, which was we have a visual thing with some of our camera sensors, the Android team, and a Kodak engineer. We're trying to figure out how we could make better processes for some of our testing. For this specific story, we had a bunch of white male engineers building the sensor and realized they had a blind spot for certain skin tones that they couldn't test on themselves because their process was about like, them standing in front of it, taking a picture, see how the sensor responded, things like that. And color charts don't do a great idea. So we heard about this story and we thought, oh, that's a really great idea. And then we were like, is this important to like the organization or at all? And so that's where the research component came in here, right? Which is, okay, we can tie this into the product excellence work. At the time, product excellence was becoming, this was about 3 years ago, product excellence was an important part of kind of the messaging and comms, both internally and externally, and specifically making sure that our products work for everybody. And so we had a visually compelling thing that we then grafted on kind of into the impact world of like, why would this be important to the business and for HR? And that fit nicely into the like inclusion landscape, right? Of making people feel welcome and making sure that our products are reaching the next billion users and things like that. And so with that, we kind of shifted from a low organizational importance to a high organizational importance in this example. And so you can check out that video at go/integrating inclusion. We won't show it here. And then in the same way, we made it something for us that we were engaged in. And so what we ended up doing was shooting a mock commercial, which for the education team at Google was not something it's not something that we usually make. We don't usually shoot. We're in the like, here's a smart person talking on camera. We don't do a whole lot of the like, let's shoot a dinner party in the hills of Oakland and like a bunch of cool people taking some pictures. And so that was a part of that client experience as well, of like convincing my boss, this is worth investing in because people are the whole idea here is that we need a camera good enough to show, in this case, Black people on camera, right, by telling the story, because our phones won't do it. We need a higher end camera to be able to tell that story and capture it so that we can still see him while on camera the sensor isn't working. And so we were able to kind of, through attaching it to those things I mentioned earlier, kind of got buy-in for it. And this went external, which is very rare for us. As an HR team, 90% of our stuff is internal.
Yeah, I think when this was first proposed to us, it was we want to raise awareness of the importance of people with disabilities in the workplace, and I think what they had envisioned was just simply having someone stand on camera and say exactly that. Working with people with disabilities in the workplace is really important. You should be aware of them. You should respect them. You should support them, and they were a great client to work with, because I was saying, you know, it sounds like it's a really important topic, and it sounds like if you're not seeing these behaviors that you want, it's because of a lack of empathy. And filmmaking is good for, you know, if it's good for anything, it's for really building a sense of empathy and using some storytelling and showing the people that you're who are, you know, Googlers in the workplace would be really, I think, a great way to do that. It's still, we kept it really simple. We still shot it in the studio. We just used some different colored backgrounds, and actually a lot of what it took to just get this greenlit was there was a reference piece of work. I can't remember exactly where that was. That looked very similar, that was already out there, and it was about people with disabilities. And I showed that to the client, and they're like, "Oh, you could do that for us with our employees?" And I was like, "Yeah, we totally could." And they just immediately said yes. So I think I still put together a deck for it, but I probably didn't.
You do have the deck. We need to switch the stuff, but I know how to press the red button, but I don't know how to shift the slides.
Oh, you don't have to show it, I don't think.
All right. But it looks very similar to that. So kind of the references in the creative proposal helped for that.
Yeah, let me just take a look here. Yeah, so this was for the channel specialist position. And again, it was very simple and straightforward. They wanted to encourage people, and this was an externally facing video, that you know, working at Google, specifically in this position, you didn't have to be, you know, an engineer. You didn't need an MBA. You didn't have to go to like you know, to Harvard or MIT. That really what they wanted were people who had a lot of world experience, who came from diverse backgrounds, who were even interested in making career shifts. Maybe you're a teacher, maybe you're a manager at Walmart. You know, as long as you kind of understand people and can think about finding great talent, that they were interested in talking to you. And that's really what they wanted to do. And again, they were mainly thinking of it in terms of like, let's just have someone on camera. Let's just take one of our channel specialists, or let's take one of our, you know, senior leaders and just have them say that. And instead we kind of shifted it again into this narrative thing. I was like, well, do you have somebody who, you know, who is a channel specialist now, who's one of those people? And it turns out, yeah, we had a teacher, they had an ex-Marine, they had a guy who worked at Walmart, and they were all these like successful channel specialists at this point. And so we wound up just putting them on camera and doing a day in the life of them in the workplace and telling their story about where they were and how they kind of identified the channel specialist position, and then how they wound up being at Google and how much they love being there now. So,
yeah, and this is another example for us. So there is over, I think there's 1,000 now channel specialists at Google. So like this was business, this is critical important to the business. They were willing to put money behind it, and we just showed them we could take that money, go down to Austin, and make a great video that's more visually compelling than just someone talking. And kind of helping them understand that for the same bang for the buck, in a sense, we can make something that's a little bit more impactful out in the world. So the next one I'll say, and this was more an example of a test, which is, and this is an internal request. So specifically, our research came out. So this is 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. VR was a pain in the butt, but it was starting to be talked about, and I figured I should get more competent at it. But I did not have any sort of idea of how to make a VR thing or what to do or how to do it. And our research came out about the oxygen stuff, which is research that shows that the number one factor for team effectiveness is a quality called psychological safety. And so I was like, well, that seems very important to HR. I wonder if I could make a video that has that as a part of it. So I met with the psychological safety team. They were doing some trainings, and I said, what if we could sit in on a team meeting and do that? In this case, like, it's not a great video. The link is here. You can go watch it. It was super hard. It took me 2 weeks of straight rendering at the time. This was before GoPro bought Autopana. So a lot of the technology was like very, very difficult to like make the video. Even here, you can like see the seam in the line of the door of that person walking in. It was hard to make, but what it did do is it made me compelled as a filmmaker to like work on this creative project. And it gave me a chance to kind of set up knowing and understanding VR for the next few years and having an opinion on that stuff. So even though the content was more about like this toxic team meeting that's happening, I kind of wanted to set up a test and build our own team skills and perspective on VR. And so I set up this as an example of that and convinced my boss to make a VR film. And then I just grafted it onto the impactful case, which is psychological safety is important to team. Psychological safety is important to team effectiveness. And we kind of went from there. And it ended up shaping my perspective on VR and for a lot of other people on VR for the next several years because we did this. So it was useful even if the thing itself wasn't compelling at the time. It was compelling for me as a filmmaker to invest and not have it just be a run-of-the-mill kind of experience. And then the last one here is mental health, which I kind of talked through already, and reduce the stigma of mental health and kind of filming people. And so I think with that, we're going to just go to like a Q&A. So if anyone has questions on those projects, on other projects, on specific stuff, I think a lot of this is going to depend on like our own teams or frameworks or stuff like that. And I think there's a Dory that we'll pull up at some point to kind of look through those questions. But if someone has something in the room that pinged for them, we'll start there or not. We have a mic.
So you mentioned saying no to potential clients is really difficult. I think we on our team struggle with that as well. Do you have anything like systematized at the front end of your intake process where people like in a request form like review parameters of working with your team or using your team services to reduce the number of times you actually have to be the person saying no to them? So it's more like the system or the process is saying no as opposed to Will or Rag saying no.
We don't really, and this might be a problem if you have a higher volume, but actually one of the things I try to do is I always try to give somebody 30 minutes if they take the time to make a request, because a lot of times what I do is I say no, but then we work with filmmakers a lot, and they really especially for the simpler kinds of content, they really get it. And what I can do a lot of times is say no, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to a vendor. And then as part of that, I'm going to let that vendor use our studio and maybe our equipment. And so what winds up happening is, I think I've even gotten like peer bonuses and other things for basically saying no, but still able to kind of make them feel supported, make them feel like that we actually care about their project, and can actually lead to a really strong relationship down the road. And I know, like, depending on the volume of requests that come in, you might not always be able to do that. But I do try to always meet with somebody if I can, especially if I'm going to tell them no.
Yeah, but yeah. So that we have like peel-offs, like with the vendor route or just the consultation route, or here's how you can make it yourself route. On our site, we kind of peel people off of like, are you in this budget range, or this budget range? And then we can give them the appropriate process, whether that's like, here's how you would do it yourself. Here's how you would contact a full-on agency. Here's how you would contact a vendor with our consultation on the idea. And then I think the other thing is getting back to what is the program about? What is the product about? What is the video about? Will doesn't mention this, but I've seen Will a number of times just by asking the questions of what the program is about. They walk away going, actually, we don't need a video. We didn't include this example. There was an example of one group. They're called CPOD, and what they do is they do executive coaching for Google. And they came to us with a request that kind of seemed simple. We explained to them, like, if this is the metric you're trying to do, this is what you need to make a video of. That'll cost, let's just say, like $25,000. And they were like, oh, that's totally right. If we're going to make a video, we need to do that. And then they were like, but our program isn't at that point. Like, as a program, we shouldn't spend $25,000 on a video, even though we know that if we do make a video, this is what it should be. And so they were able to tell themselves no as a result of that line of questioning. Because at the end of the day, what is video good for? Compelling, emotional, human stories. And so if you can kind of direct them towards that avenue of making the decision themselves, that we kind of do that as well in our request. Yes, Paul, hello. Yes, we will definitely share it to the video group.
And it has some example creative proposals.
Yeah, we have example creative proposals. We have all our videos. You can go check those out. Happy to open up all that stuff.
So just want to follow up with that audience question I had earlier. So I think GDS might also feel my pain. We're doing videos majority of the time for not a general audience, but like a educated, specific audience of marketing professionals. And the videos we're making are like updates of how to do something new with a Google tool, or maybe it's a sales team, there's a new tool. And typical content is like 30 minutes, and it's not one feature we're trying to get across. So like your hacking example would be like, I mean, much cooler, much more fun to do, but I don't know how to pivot from, guy or girl running through a deck, talking about code and analytics you can look at. I'd like to be a little bit more visual, but other than like maybe having like a roundtable discussion, I'm not quite sure how to pivot away from doing that sort of, dull presentation.
Right. Are these going on, these are on YouTube? These
are all YouTube. They're public facing, but they're targeted to like a partner agency, someone who spends millions of dollars at Google. They want to make sure that this agency knows how to use all the new features. Or maybe it is the sales team. There's a new button they can click that'll get them leads. Those are actually a little bit easier, but but yeah, a lot of the content is like 30 to 60 minutes, and it's just all the new features being talked about at once.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would do with something like that is look at the audience retention graph on YouTube, because if you can show your client, you're starting with 100% of your audience. So maybe how many people look at these things? 500, 1,000?
Yeah, less. But the retention's usually good. Like there's no complaints. We've been cranking these out for like 5 years. There's no complaints there. I mean,
well, I guess, you could say like, maybe we could get a bump in audience retention or something like that. That would be my argument in terms of if I were, or are you talking more creatively how to?
Yeah, I'm not even sure how to tackle making a discussion that's 30 minutes long about all these new features, more dynamic. Like the documentary style feels maybe not the right approach.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not.
Okay.
My first thought would be getting back to the reasoning, right? Like there's usually a reason behind the tool's creation. Recently, we've been working on some other stuff, and we were talking to kind of some screenwriters and how they pitch, right? And you have to go in and just pitch your screenplay to like Hollywood executives. And they, from the two people we discussed, they talked about, I start with a personal reason. Like, here's why I wrote this screenplay. I think in a similar way, you could search for those whys. Why is this new tool being made? And I would say that money in certain circles is a compelling reason. And you can show that. Like, do you want double-digit year-over-year growth? Right? Like, you can start with a compelling reason of like motivation and get that buy-in from people early on to help it be a little bit more compelling. I think the other thing would be like, and this may be more on the influencing side, see if there's something that you could pull out, either a story or a personal narrative in those talks from the people, or inject something, I mean, not Legos, but like something that maybe creatively would get you a little bit more plugged in of like, this would be interesting if we kind of did it this way.
And for 30, I mean, audience, like, because we used to look at audience retention for the Creator Academy videos, and, especially once you start getting 20 and 25 minutes out, I mean, it was dropping towards zero, right? If we could hold at 70 or 80%, like that was an amazing video. Most times, you maybe had 20% of your audience at the end of it. So one of the things I would do is I'd say, even just as an experiment, can we put out a piece of content that is similar to this, but where we can see if we're suddenly, holding 70% of that audience across the, the duration of 30 minutes. That's actually really, really good. But maybe you're already holding them. Maybe they have to watch this.
Yeah, I think it's the case. It's like, it's the people who are watching it are going to make money, or they're going to save time. Right. We don't really,
where I'm at, we don't really work with the clients so much on the audience retention side. But when I do get a look at that, it's either like a really quick drop off, like, nope, this is not for me, or people are watching through to the end, or at least until the Q&A.
Right.
We do have one. James, I don't know how to switch over to our computer.
Which one are you going to put up?
The disability awareness.
Hmm?
Disability awareness.
Sure.
Yes, that'll be it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think staffing would be better because I think I had a really specific timeline and budget. Unless you had a reason for.
This is the one I had up, but I can go to the staffing one and switch that over. Yeah. So we'll go here. That's going to be channels recruiting, and we'll switch it over. Say share. There we go. So this is an example of a creative brief that we'll put together. This will be in the deck that we'll share with the video community, and you can click through it. It's on my right screen, sorry, not on my left screen.
Yeah, they had given me an initial name, some initial names of some people who might have good stories for us, and I just did some really brief research on them, and I think I'm not sure if I talked to both of them beforehand, but just pulling out these images of these two people, and then these were I think these were mostly made up quotes, but I put them in quotes with their name and the images, and like I could just tell the minute they saw this, they're like, yes, this is what we want. Oh, it's such a great idea to tell his story and to tell her story, because they knew these people personally and they knew they had amazing emotional stories. And it hadn't really occurred to them when they asked for the video that they were kind of like sitting every day with the people who would be the best advocates to have, you know, more diverse and inclusive channel specialists join the team.
And yeah, we can just kind of go through
it. You know, I tried to show them like we're going to come down and film in Austin. You know, again, showing their buildings, showing some cool stuff. Always trying to use images, you know, again, you know, showing the client too that you understand, because I think maybe someone had mentioned the Army or had mentioned Walmart. By putting those images, all of a sudden they're like, teacher, Walmart, Army. They're like, oh, this guy gets it. Those are the people we're trying to hire, right? I think that ultimately got cut, but it was, you know, but it was in there, and then you can just kind of.
We threw out some options.
Yeah, I think at this point I was fairly specific. I tried to actually narrow it down because they gave me a very long list of people. And I think I just was like, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to pick 4 people. I'm going to try to get some quotes from them. I think we actually asked them, oh, this is what we did. I asked them in a spreadsheet to just put like a little blurb about themselves. That way I could just copy that text and pull that text out and put it in my creative proposal. Give some sample questions. And then as far as the tone, you know, this video that's being referenced, this was made for by an agency for brand marketing like years and years and years ago. It still is just a great reference. People see it. It looks really pretty. You know, it's got some beautiful shots. It's very stylized. And then, yeah, like I said, I set a budget range, just kind of, you know, just kind of eyeballed it and gave them a very specific kind of timeline.
I think the other thing here is that the budget and timeline comes after the great visual example video.
The very, 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 very end. When there's like 1 minute left to go. I would say, oh, just one more thing. We're going to need 2 months and about $100,000.
Anyway, yeah, so get people bought in, liking the idea, committed to it, and then they can start to think about what is that going to look like.
And that's a pretty typical, you know, a lot of times it's communicating to the client that you understand what their product or program or whatever is about, right? Even if the specifics of what you're proposing, like that goes a long way. They're like, this person gets it. And I've seen that, you know, I've tried to work with outside agencies sometimes for work that we can't quite do, or maybe I still want to oversee it. And I found it really frustrating that they just weren't getting it. Like they have this very external perspective of like what Google is. They look at like Google's commercial marketing and then they go, oh, here's what you want. And I'm like, nope, you still don't get it. This is an internal video. This is for an internal audience. So can we get back to Dory somehow?
We'll get there.
Okay. Any in-room questions?
Maybe a follow-up question on that. Creating the brief, it's like obvious in the craft that it takes a good bit of your time to do that. So just to confirm, you touched on this in the presentation. You've already confirmed at the point at which you start the brief that they have budget, that you already have like 80% buy-in that this is actually going to happen to prevent you from like doing all the work and then having them be shocked and surprised that it's not something that can be done in like a week or something.
Yeah, or actually even worse than that is because that brief itself is a product, just by presenting that to the client, they can take that and present that as something they had created or sourced, right? So you can find yourself, where people are like, hey, can you give me a creative proposal that I can take to my manager about a video I've been thinking about doing? It's like, no, I don't think so, right? So you could just, because I think, especially if people come from marketing, agencies will do that for them all day, right? They just keep sending them, here's a pitch, here's a pitch, here's a pitch. And we're a small team. We don't have the time to do that. So yeah, I do push back that creative proposal until I really know that this is something we're going to do.
Yeah, and in this case, we have the client follow-up. That's that kind of third stage of our process. So like going to them and going, hey, we're thinking of going to do this. And in that example, we had the yes before we kind of started with that. Another example might be, there may not be budget because it may be an internal idea that we've come up with. So then your creative proposal isn't for the client, it's for your own team or boss to understand why it's important to make it and kind of go from there.
I can answer this. Since 90% of your content is internal only, where do you host content and how do you measure success basically? Typically we're hosting it on Drive. Measuring success is, just looking at the data. Like we can pull data from Google Drive videos, but actually for us, success is measured in different ways. So for the disability video, it got reused multiple times. It had the initial campaign, and I think it was on like the Daily Insider or something. So that was the initial campaign, and we got tons of feedback from people dev, people ops, people around the company. Regardless of how many people actually saw the video, I think the reaction that we saw told us that we had done the right thing and we had done good work. But then after that, I got another email a couple of months later where they wanted to use it in a secondary context and needed a different piece of, they needed the video in a different format. That again is like a signal to me, this has now become a thing, right? So the people on the disability team like this piece of work so much that they're actually going, we're going out to colleges or we're going out to here. We got to take this video with us, right? So it becomes this piece. And then finally, the video was actually just put up on YouTube. It actually went external. It was never envisioned as an external piece. It was for Disability Awareness Week. And as of just a few weeks ago, they got clearance and it's up on YouTube now. So it actually still has a shelf life. For the Eileen, the Pops video, I think just hearing from our senior vice president that, she really, really loved it and was proud to put it in her email. And this is the kind of work she'd like to see her team do more of. That's a great, metric for success for us. And for the channel specialist video, the fact that we're now hearing from that team on a routine basis, can you come back down to Austin? Can you do another video? We've already gone down there once and done the second one. And they just came to us with a third one, which we actually said no to because we felt like it was a little outside of the scope of what we do. The hard metrics of viewers, because our audience is so small and in many cases very specific and very fragmented, the actual numbers of, like 300 people or 500 people or 1,000 people saw this video doesn't mean that much to us. I think it's more about the response that we get from the teams and the shelf life that we see with the video.
The other thing is we're technically under a learning and development team. So my manager all the time talks about what's called behavior change. So the other thing that we look at a lot is like your views almost don't matter. It's more about like, are you changing the behavior of a person in the specific idea that you want? And so For us, that's a success. Also internally, what People Ops is 3,000, 3,500 now maybe. So we deal with a little bit smaller stuff. For us, it's always great as an internal team when your stuff goes external. So that's usually an indicator of that. We've had a few things go to I/O, not on the main stage, but just being presented in the Google feed. That's a major win for an internal team, just the like 5 of us. And our org and structure see it that way too. But I would say behavior change is the other thing that you could look at as a metric of like, how do you change behavior? And maybe it's not a screen recording or someone talking. Maybe there's other ways to prompt behavior change. For example, with the You're Not Alone, it was about making people feel that other people had mental health problems who were competent, smart, wonderful people at Google. And since then, benefits, not allocation, but like use has gone up. So our video is more effective at driving change of the company to utilize and leverage the tools that we had already had in place. That was kind of an external metric of our success related to that video. Next one on the dory, I'll just go there, is from low org to high org. Is that how our team works, or ever have to deal with low org? The short answer is yeah, we deal with a variety of things. I would also say that metrics is like more informal. It just is a guide. We definitely work with stuff where it's sometimes presented to us and we just allocate only the resources necessary for that. And this talk specifically is about how to shift some of those things. So that's kind of why that framework is there.
Although I think we do try to take some of that work and see if they'd be willing to work with a vendor, which again engages in that budget conversation. Because if you're finding that you can't really define it as a very important thing to the organization, and there are no resources allocated to it, it's a good opportunity to push back. I mean, I think we really can get trapped into, and I think, as Google grows as a company, you see more and more of getting trapped into doing work that just isn't that relevant, but it seems to just get moving for one reason or another. And I can tell you, it's, then you talk to senior leaders and you find out that they're actually really frustrated with that, right? They'd like to see people doing less work of higher importance, rather than just, all of this kind of bureaucratic stuff that's happening. So it goes back to that thing. It's hard to say no. And that's why a lot of this stuff gains steam. And I think, saying no in a respectful but supportive way, saying, no, I won't make that video for you, but if it's important to you, I understand that. Let me see if I can help you in some way, kind of get this project made, can go a long way.
Are there 20% opportunities at any stage of the video production that engineers or other employees with interest in filmmaking can take on? I think I speak for all of us when I say absolutely. Yeah. What I will say is it is a lot more work than you may realize. I've had a number of people. So funny stuff about People Ops, it kind of over-biases theater kids. Because anyway, it just does in my experience. When I put out a casting call, I had 100 people respond. So what I will say though is that it is usually more of an ask than you realize. Video takes time, editing takes time, rendering takes time. Being on set all day, usually it's not helpful to a producer if you can only, we'll just walk through a few examples. So we have a shoot coming up. It's going to be, an all-day stuff. We're going to go do an interview. We're going to capture some day in the life. I think for most of us in the room, we're familiar with this thing. So this is more for the question specifically here. Right, and then someone's like, oh, can I help out on a video project? Yeah, we'd love to have you. There's going to be probably a pre-production meeting the day before where we prep the site, look through the site, or there may be a scout. Then you'll show up day of, and you'll do the shoot. If you wanted to be useful in that capacity, the most easy thing is going to be like in a PA role. Like, can you get waters? Can you handle some crafty or bring some of the stuff from the NK down to set? In an ideal world, maybe you know how to use a C-stand correctly and know what a flag is and know what a Cardellini is, or a number 2 or a number 1, having you on set in that capacity. But it's usually hard to just dip in for a couple of hours on a video, on production and help in that. The thing that I found a little bit easier is to sit over the shoulder of an editor while we're working and kind of just more be a fly on the wall. In production, that's hard because sometimes you can get in the way. Like if we're moving really quick, or if I'm just kind of grabbing shots as I go with a camera on my shoulder, I'm not going to have time to like explain the process, what I'm gathering or doing stuff like that. I would say definitely reach out. Each team is different. There's a number of opportunities in people wanting to use, like help other Googlers grow in the community. But I would understand that like it's usually larger than a 20%. And if you're going to commit to a day on set, it's more of a hassle for the producers involved to like manage you only coming for an hour or two than it is for like you to be there the whole day and to know what the grip or equipment or some of the workflows are. Or in the case of like sitting over someone's shoulder. I know for us in our studio, we'd love to have someone sit in and watch kind of our editing workflow. We'd love to talk you through that. Or creatively think of ways, can you grab some pictures of some empty desks or some art around Google? There's probably some ways around that we could do it as well. And the other thing I would 100% say is that video, at least from my perspective, sorry, mic tap, is very underutilized in the metrics world. Metrics on Drive are super difficult for us creative production folk to get access to the YouTube databases necessary to build cases for our videos. So if you're an engineer or something like that listening in and have some help on that end, I think a number of us in the community would appreciate any sort of technical insights and help on building out more metrics-based, not dashboards, but even just finding a way to get into those databases. Who do we talk to? How do we pull metrics from Drive? For example, right now we're doing some podcast stuff. We haven't figured out how to capture the metrics of a WAV file off Drive. How long do people listen? What database is that? Does it technically sit within YouTube? Or is it a different like database that it's sitting in that Drive plays its raw files from? So those would be some opportunities. I would say reach out to a number of teams. I think the highest production ones are going to be Google Developer Studio and Cloud Production Studio. They are like brilliant at scale and make some wonderful stuff that there's always opportunities to work on. I think I'll look over. They could use some hands-on stuff, or reach out to us. We're the People Dev Video team, or the Video Discuss. You can throw your name out there with a specific skill list. And then I would say keep following up, because like we're working and working and working on many videos that continue to turn over, and sometimes we'll forget about your request. So I would say just keep kind of asking. That was me talking a whole lot. I apologize for that.
That's okay. I was also going to say, I'm always looking for new ways to tell stories using Google's products or using technology in some kind of way. So maybe you work on, computer vision or self-driving cars, is there an opportunity to use that data or that visual kind of experience of like, what does a self-driving car see in terms of data? If you think like, oh, there might be some way to use this as a way to tell a story, or if you work, on the Google Earth team or anything that if you can think of, the area in which you work, that there's some kind of way to visualize that. I think that's also a way to kind of tap into working with somebody like us, because then, I can think the next time I have a story that needs some visual, kind of help or some technology to support it. Maybe that's where we can collaborate.
Yeah.
What was your Lego budget?
Great question. I said great question.
It is a great question. I think it was $35,000. But it was not a $35,000 video, right? And actually one of the most, it was kind of a compliment, but the first question was, who made this video? And somebody came back and said, I think it was brand marketing. It's like, oh, I can't believe you just said that. They said that to the VP. And then I had to be like, no, it wasn't. It was your own team, But I took it as a compliment because, it was very polished, it was very professional, and it looked like something that a professional ad agency or marketing team would do. Rags provided all the cinematography, amazing cinematography, and did all the camera work. Our team did all of the production and the creative development. Donica did amazing editorial work. And that alone would have cost tens of thousands of dollars, which we didn't have to put into it. The budget mainly went towards the Lego guy, who actually turned out to be fairly expensive. I think it was $10,000 to $15,000. And although I do have to say, when I threw that out as a number, I think he was a little shocked. He's like, well, because I forget how we got to that number, but I thought that he was asking for that. And then when I said it, he's like, oh, okay. I was like, oh, maybe I offered too much. And then the art direction, which I didn't think, if anybody knows a really good art director, I was really, really disappointed with what that person showed up with on the day, given the amount of money. I think we had allocated like $10,000, because we have like a desk that's supposed to be welcoming, and we wanted a crafted kind of card and some other stuff that really looked like this is the first day you're walking up to your desk. And like, he just like showed up with a plant, and we got the card, and I don't know.
Yeah, you don't see it in the video, but it starts with like all white, and then the standing desk rises into frame with like a flower and a card on it. But like, we ended up redoing the flower. I personally found the card and then just emailed the artist and said, hey, can we use this? So yeah, I would say if you have a good art director recommendation, it's a little bit more, that would be useful.
And so that was really all the budget went into basically the Lego and the art. And then I think maybe you had a camera assistant. Oh, we got a dolly.
Yeah, so we were shooting in Lego, so I needed a macro set. So we got a macro set of lenses that we obviously, shooting people, I don't shoot macro stuff all the time for our work. So part of our budget went into that. And the dolly for some of those smooth moves on the tight lenses.
A follow-up question on that. Do you generally charge for your time as well, or number of days on a project?
We don't. We don't. So for us, that's kind of within our remit being on staff. I was first hired as a video specialist. My job was to film all the video content we were delivering for internal educational stuff. So I was kind of hired, even though it's not my title, right? I was hired as a cinematographer. So I consider my time is already paid for by Google. And then any outside people we work through ASG or Ripple Makers, when we bring them on, they're paid for their role. But for our core team, we kind of already have that allocated in our year budget.
And I think we're still thinking through that, because it's only recently that we started using ASG, which gives us, since ASG is across multiple video teams, where we can start thinking of, I guess we could onboard, a part-time producer, and then that person could be paid for with budgets from other projects that are even outside of our department. So, I think we're open to that. We just haven't figured out how to do that model yet. But it's definitely an interesting model. Where someday we'll all be one video team again, which is how we all started.
We asked for budget from other teams to create budget. How do you approach budget transfer? Are you doing this through POs?
When you ask for budget, okay. I think so. A lot of times, if it is if it's somebody within our org, I will often open the PO and then just put their cost center and project code in. If it's outside of our org, I usually just have them do the PO.
Yeah, the other thing is that we developed a pretty strong relationship. Again, we're an internal team, so we have specific stuff. We have a great relationship with the Ripple Makers, which is a video production company here that they can do high-end stuff. Don't get me wrong, they're great. But they're not like a full-on San Francisco ad agency. And since we have a great relationship with them, we'll just have them open the PO, and then we'll help them manage that. Oftentimes, the people coming to us, the reason they're coming to us is because they don't know video. So we will then help them manage the PO, but it'll sit with Ripple Makers. And then Ripple Makers knows, at our request, not to necessarily ask them, but to ask us. And then we'll budget all of that stuff through Ripple Makers. So Ripple Makers will onboard my gaffer or my AC as like a crew member for their day rate. And then that will come out of Ripple Makers budget, which the outside cost center org PA created the PO for, which I hope answers that. And then you may not have asked this, Ray, but like I think a similar thing, you can casually ask for budget. Not everything has to be Like, you don't have to like sit down and like lean forward and put your hands on the table and say like, what is your budget? I think you can casually just say as an indicator, like searching for red flags, will just say like, and do you have any budget for this? Or like, what's your budget for this project? With the assumption that they have budget, and then they have to react to your question. And so it doesn't have to be a formal, like, we can only make this if you have like $50,000. You just kind of throw out like, you know, in a very friendly way, hopeful that they have money, right? Just say like, what's your budget for this? We're excited to work on it. And then let them take that more casual note, and then you can see their response to that. Is it, oh, I hadn't thought of that, let me go back and ask. Or you're like, okay, I have someone who's willing to at least invest in this slightly, even if it's just a question, or someone who's not thinking about that at all and kind of doesn't care. So you can ask for budget much more casually than you may think.
And I think we usually ask for budget after we've had that team meeting where we've kind of decided, you know, we're a small team. So sometimes we might say, you know, this would be really interesting to film, but it's going to be a real heavy lift editorially, right? And then since, you know, we mainly have Donica doing editing in London, you know, do we want to take up weeks of her time doing this, or should we just outsource that? So a lot of times the budgets are very strategic, or, you know, like the Lego video is a great example. It didn't really have any crew costs, right? It was just for art direction and Legos primarily, for stuff that goes beyond the competencies of what we have in-house. So the budgets are typically very strategic to what part of this project interests us the most, and do we have the most skills to bring to it? And then what part, you know, has just a lot of heavy lifting that could overwhelm our team that maybe we want to throw some budget into.
So before we go on to the next story question, if there's anyone on GVC who has a question that didn't put in the dory, feel free to unmute and ask.
Did Rags turn off his mic before he ran off? Are you able to mute his mic? Oh, okay. Okay, let's see, what's the next one? I understand narrative is a great way to learn, but would you say it requires much more in pre-production production? Can you give a first-hand typical estimate time of completion for an average narrative video you complete? What happens when UI or software changes? Any recommendations? Yeah, I mean, what you're doing when you try to shift, and that's why I was saying, you know, sometimes a one is a one, is you're committing to making a simple project much more difficult on yourself. And so I don't do it with everything that comes in, right? Sometimes it's just like, you know what, let's just bring this one in the studio, keep it simple. Yeah, it takes a lot more time. And, you know, and I've been doing this for 16 years here at Google. And I still, like, when I start that creative proposal, I'm just like, why did I do this? I'm no good at this. I don't have any ideas. This is going to be the one that gets me fired. This isn't going to work, you know? And then I'm just like, I give up and I go to the micro kitchen, and then the idea hits. And I'm like, oh, I got an idea. So yeah, it takes a lot more time. I also, you know, I think for all of the creative proposals, going back and talking to other creative people, David, who's here in the audience, has always been a great, you know, person that I like to talk to, or Rags. I tend to bring ideas to my team multiple times because the best idea usually comes out of a much more collaborative kind of space than anything I can just think of personally. And also, a lot of times the best person to give you the idea is the client. And they don't, it's like, but you can't tell them that you're trying to get it from them, because then they get all kind of weird and they're like, well, I thought that was your job. But like the channel specialist video, like, they were the ones that ultimately told me. They're like, oh, we have this guy, he's like amazing, he used to be in the Army and then he did this, and I was like, oh, tell me more, right? And I was like, oh, they're giving me the idea. And I've had that happen multiple times where it's really the client, and a lot of times they come to you with what they think is a great video idea, and it is a horrible idea, right? And so you're like, okay, you're not in charge of the idea, but actually they are. You're still trying to get the idea out of them, but not in the way that they think is how a video should be made. But they probably have that information floating around in their head of a great visual tool or a great story in their department that's really going to be what you're going to make. So I don't. And then you know, when UI or software changes, yeah, I mean, I'm really reluctant to get involved in a video project when they're telling me like, this is still early beta. There's still a lot of changes. We haven't exactly identified this program, but we just want to get started. That always turns out to just be like a really big time sink. And I tend to just try to push people back and say, like, you really don't want to actually start making a video until you know exactly what your product is and everything is, is pretty solidified.
I would put it on them to understand. I would set your expectations. So like we've started to have this a few times as well. Obviously, if your mandate is to like make videos about the UI, I would just update your clients appropriately, right? To be like, okay, but if you change that button color, like I'm gonna have to render for a week. So like, just make them aware that every change they do has impact. You're not saying no to their idea or like what change they may need to make, right? But you're just letting them know that like by doing this action, your action will have consequences. And then it's on them when they make that change to have started the video, to invest your time or resources. Again, you're not like saying no or like, hey, we won't do that, or I'm not trying to be helpful, but you're just letting them know like video takes this amount of time for this amount of stuff. So if you change this UI element or this thing, that's going to have a number of consequences downstream in post-production, which means it'll be a week later or 2 weeks later or things like that. I think for us, it's not a UI thing, but our in HR and people ops names change all the time for the programs. Like 1 week it's unbiasing, the next week it's unconscious biasing. We have like an hour-long talk and like the whole Go link and other Go links referencing, is it Go/wellbeing or is it Go/benefits? Those change all the time based on, I don't know, whatever reason. I know smart people make those decisions, but anyway, it affects our downstream work. So if that happens, I just let them know, if you do that, we're gonna have to re-render this video, suck away some editorial resources, things like that, so that they know like when you make this change, these are the consequences that will happen, and here's what you can expect either as a timeline or a cost increase for editorial time.
And then sometimes I'll build it into the creative. We had one at YouTube where they wanted to talk about YouTube analytics, but they wanted to localize it into, I think, 10 different languages. So then they wanted a video that was talking about some like specific UI kind of element, but we couldn't show the UI because it was going to be localized into all these different languages, right? And so it was just like, oh my God. And they wanted it to be creative and interesting. And we wound up doing something, it had some hand-drawn animation, but he intentionally left kind of the center of the screen was designed so that in post-production, we could basically do localized graphics, localized text and localized graphics in the center, so that the video still had like a really creative kind of approach to it with music, with the voiceover, with the hand-drawn animation around most of it. And then in editorial, they were basically able to go through and create multiple versions of this video with localized kind of graphics in the center. So I suppose you could do the same thing with UI, right? Where you're like, this UI might change, so I can't do something specific, really specific, where like the UI flies together on the screen and like builds out, because then if it changes, we're screwed. But I can do something really creative and then cut to a static shot of the UI, right? So that way, if the UI changes tomorrow, you can just swap it out and put it in. So I will sometimes design creative around this idea that something might change.
Yeah, I would also, I'm not the best expert here, but part of this is just to have a conversation. I would also imagine that there's a way to create still images of your asset so that in Premiere, in our case, you could swap it so that like, and just rename the graphic so that it overwrites itself, so that your new graphic automatically gets synced into your project. And if you're doing a phone, like the phone UI is going to be the same dimensions, right? Or if you're doing a video capture, you know it's going to be 1920 by 1080 or whatever. You know your pixel size. Now you may have more specific stuff, so I don't want to say that, but there may be like an asset structure. This is English, this is Portuguese, this is Spanish, this is Norwegian, right? And then you just swap out that asset locally for the project and re-export with the same dimensions so that it all syncs together.
Is that it? Are we done?
Anyone else on GVC? Last chance for questions.
Nope, everybody's hanging up.
Sweet. Yeah, the only last thing I would say is just, I would go back to like, first, we did this partly to start a conversation. I think sometimes we just get into the summit and then like, obviously we have to go back to our jobs and like make the thousands of videos we need to make. So I would say reach out to us. Like, you know, we don't have all the answers. Our workflows are different than some other people's. The biggest thing I would try and take away is just our general process for some of this stuff. And then research. I think a lot of the things we kind of forget is to like research the teams, the products, what they're trying to do, and how we can kind of inject our ideas into their business OKRs to make some stuff that we want to make.
Thank you so much for lending your time. I guess I'm going to try to step into the camera here with you guys. Wanted to thank everyone who's still on GVC, who's listening in, and those who dropped off or maybe are going to be watching this recording that we post in the next few weeks. Thanks again for your time. Thanks again for both of you for lending a little bit of insight into your process and also your mind and the org of People Ops. So thanks again, everyone, for attending.
Yay.